Great. Well, welcome everyone. It's really wonderful to have our group here today, and also want to welcome those who are joining us by Zoom. We have family members, Civic Scholar alumni, and other supporters who are Zooming in from around the country. I'm here to just offer a brief introduction to the Gephardt Institute and to this event, and then pass off to the people we're really here to hear from. For those I don't know, my name is Stephanie Kurtzman, and it's my honor to serve as Executive Director for the Gephardt Institute for Civic and Community Engagement. And just a word to help put in context the Gephardt Institute. What we focus on is fostering student learning, participation, and impact in civic life. And the ideal outcome of our efforts to do this is when we foster civic leaders who are prepared with the knowledge, the skills, the experience, and of course the lifelong commitment to lead positive change in the civic environment. We know how much change is needed. We know how fraught the civic environment is locally as well as nationally, and how much work there is to be done, and that we need both passionate and skilled young leaders like our Civic Scholars. So here we have the Civic Scholars Program. This is one of our flagship programs at the Gephardt Institute, and to date we have prepared 151 students and alumni for future civic leadership. We have 16 seniors who have spent 2 years together, combining academic learning, civic learning and dialogue, and listening and experiential learning to develop their skills and their preparation as future civic leaders. One hallmark of the program that you'll hear more about is the Civic Summer, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to thank everyone for being here. We've got so many wonderful people here, from our junior Civic Scholars who are here to listen, half of our seniors who are presenting tonight, the other half who are presenting tomorrow night, many of our greatest supporters and donors to the program, and an exceptional team of instructors who have guided the students through the process. So thank you all for coming, and now it's my pleasure to introduce the other Stephanie Weiskopf, who's one of the co-instructors for the seniors, and she'll tell you more about the Civic Summer and what we'll be doing here tonight. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I do recognize that I stand in the way of hearing from the real stars of tonight, but I did want to make sure that the hard work that they've put in to get to this moment is sort of captured, because as Stephanie described, Civic Scholars being a 2-year experience is unlike any other experience you might get at WashU, of spending 4 class credits together all last year, almost wrapping up our 5th credit, which is Tuesday mornings at 9. So if you can imagine waking up that early as a senior, they almost always do. But really how we have spent our time together over the past year and a half has been, our first fall was sort of foundational. So we actually reviewed a ton of definitions of civic and community engagement, deconstructed them, and rewrote one that was a shared and understood concept from our cohort. Then in spring semester, we basically ask these scholars to be grant writers, and they are tasked with writing averaged around like 16, 18 pages of what you might submit post-college to get grant funding for a similar type project. Their funding is already guaranteed. So we already know the outcome of that, right, in terms of where they are headed for that summer, but it was a really incredible practice of understanding how to have grounded research and framework into approaching community engagement with health and ethics in mind, incorporating evaluation and how you'll know your impact was experienced, and how to close the loop. So when you exit communities, what does that look like? And many of them will speak to tonight, how their work has continued ongoing, probably beyond what they imagined. For the Civic Summer, of our 16 scholars, which you'll hear from 8 of them tonight, we had 14 of them choose to spend their summer in St. Louis, which I think is pretty remarkable given the history of the program. I think it probably speaks to spending their first year and a half on Zoom, and a real committed investment to being in a community that they didn't quite have access to their first 2 years as students. Beyond that, 5 of them actually partnered with entities affiliated with WashU. which I think is also unique and different and shows an investment to their university community in ways that you'll hear about tonight. Some common civic passion areas. So our most represented is education, then we have ability, our data nerds, which you'll hear from tonight. But really they range, way beyond that. And it's really, I think, the power of the Civic Scholars community when you get to see 16 people with such unique passions and how they've chosen to spend their summer. So all of their summers looked distinctly different, although the framework was shared. And it's really hard to capture that experience in a 5-minute presentation, which we've asked them to do tonight. So you'll probably just hear a taste of what their summer was. Over the past decade, we've changed the framework from Civic Project to Civic Summer to really speak to and center sustainability in the way in which we're building relationships with communities. So not a community to be fixed, but a community to invest in for at least one summer. So that are some of the themes that you will likely hear weaved in between all of our scholars this evening in a format presentation style called PechaKucha, which comes from some Japanese architects, and it's meant to represent chit-chat. So a real challenge to be brief, and the slides advance every 20 seconds. So I also will admit that due to the pandemic, I think we're still getting used to in-person events. So do I think this is going to go perfect? No. And I'm okay with that. But how it should go in an ideal world is the slides will advance automatically. We'll start with our first 4 scholars, which you can follow on the program. Then we'll invite those first 4 back up for people to ask them questions, either specifically or collective as a group. It's totally random. It's not even in alphabetical order, so don't look too deeply into it. It was probably just about the words in their sentence and what looked the best. And then we will transition to the last 4 and then do some closing remarks and continued reception over on my right. So with that, those are all my things. 5 minutes, 20 seconds, we all know. So that's what we have in store for you. And again, just want to express my deepest gratitude to our Civic Scholars, those who are in attendance and those who are joining virtually. I know that their success is not singular to them. It's really the investment that their champions have made in them. And so I see many of you in the room who are those people to this community. So thank you so much for being here. So our first presenter for this evening is Sarah B. So we have 2 Sarahs. I sometimes can't imagine you just being called Sarah because it's always Sarah B or Sarah N. But our first presenter is Sarah Buchanan, who's a Fox Clark Civic Scholar, wrapping up her time as a WashU undergraduate, but also in her first year as a student at the Brown School of Social Work. Sarah's project focused on expanding literacy through the development of a library and volunteer program at the St. Louis Juvenile Detention Center in order to reduce recidivism, break cycles of incarceration, and disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. So I will invite Sarah up here, and I will advance the slide. I think it's already on.
Did you know that 85% of incarcerated youth in Missouri operate at a functionally low literacy rate? This means that 85% will never have a chance to graduate high school. 85% will never have a chance to get a high-paying job. And 85% will likely spend their time trapped in cycles of incarceration. I started volunteering at the St. Louis Juvenile Detention Center in 2019. We call it the JDC. I worked in the library rec program, but the library really wasn't functional. And when I returned in 2022, the program coordinators, Ms. Nikisha Fortenberry and Ms. Tiffany Johnson, asked me to help them revitalize the library. And the library renovation project was born. We started off with a really gloomy, kind of dirty classroom that was full of boxes and old shelves. The coordinators and I planned to clean it out, paint, build new shelves, and put new materials in the library. And it took multiple people at the facility to make this project work. It really does take a village to complete this project. Everyone in the facility was involved, from the youth themselves to the smiling faces at the front desk, to the security guards, and further to the surrounding community and the donors. One of the most prominent stories of the village involvement surfaced when we had to replace shelves in the library. These shelves were made of old metal, and they had become pretty dangerous as they were broken and could be used as weapons, thrown, and used to cut other people. Additionally, they couldn't hold up the books, so we needed to buy new shelves. My original idea was to hire U Trucking to move them out of here. I gave them a call, and they agreed to come and get them at a low price. But unfortunately, after a few months of calling and calling, they were unresponsive and wouldn't help us. So after my frustration lasted, I realized that the shelves were steel and likely could be scrapped for a little extra cash. So after telling Miss Johnson about this idea, she thought we can use the court vans to move them to a steel scrapping area. But we really didn't know how to go about this. However, we got lucky that one of the security guards at the facility, Officer Lovelace, had experience in construction and scrapping. So he came up and helped us with the deconstruction process and helped us carry the steel to the vans, and we drove them there together. Miss Johnson and Miss Fortenberry and I went to the scrapyard and threw them in piles ourselves. And that steel came out to a whopping 1,260 pounds. We were able to use the extra money we earned combined with the money that we saved from firing U Trucking to buy an extra tablet for the facility, which was very serendipitous because we needed a specific iPad for the stuff that they needed for check-in and check-out and couldn't use the other tablets, and the money added up to what we needed. So from there, we started to fill the shelves with books. We spent a lot of time painting, building new shelves, and stocking them. Ms. Fortenberry and Ms. Johnson worked so hard to get this done, and through the process, we became jacks of many trades, from painting to building to even scrapping steel. After this renovation, we stocked the library with books. The St. Louis community, the WashU community, my Alabama community, and beyond all helped to get over 1,600 titles to the JDC. The process of cataloging and labeling them took forever, but I really couldn't complain with the amount of books that we got. The library space came a long way, and I'm so grateful for the village that made it possible. I learned so much about the value of teamwork and collaboration in overcoming these obstacles. I'm grateful to have been able to immerse myself in this community, and through this collaboration, we took this gloomy, uninviting space into a refreshed and welcoming space for the youth that are eager to use. The rugs and the beanbags that you see on the screen are actually picked out by the youth themselves in an effort to keep them involved in the library. They also picked out a bunch of books as well, and we got comic books for them. Since the renovation, the library has been receiving more book requests from the youth than ever before, and we hope to use the space as a way to further increase access to literature and education. In an effort to continue this work, I'm also starting a club here at WashU for volunteers to continue to go into the JDC. We're currently working on finding a faculty sponsor and working on our constitution. The club hopes to be able to bring back the library rec program, which is a board game program that the youth really love and want me to bring back. Additionally, the Brown School has encouraged me to continue my work at the JDC through my practicum and has asked me to build a practicum for them to continue to invite Brown School students into the space to work with the programming department and help sustain the library alongside the youth. It is my hope that this will help bring that 85% down to 0. Thank you.
Job, and I can't imagine going first. Can I just say that's a lot of pressure, so congrats, Sarah. So next up we have A.K. Blanks, who's a Fox Clark Civic Scholar from Greenville, South Carolina, has many minors that you can read on that piece of paper. Her project focused on providing both resources and awareness of community presence for those with disabilities on campus, which included a social media campaign, a disability-focused resource guide, and the organization of events in the partnership with the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. So next up we have A.K.
Stephanie just said, my name is AK, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my Civic Summer. The point of my Civic Summer was really just to focus and center in on those on campus that have disabilities, as that's commonly a group that's actually fairly large, but very often left out. So I'm just going to be talking about that, and throughout this presentation, I will be using person-first language as that's my preference. So you might be wondering why. Well, what you can't tell in that picture of me and my dog is that I was born hearing impaired. I wear hearing aids, I read lips, the whole gambit. So I'm very passionate about disability rights, disability activism, but I've never been passionate about being a person with disabilities. I've always kind of hid my hearing aid and tried not to talk about it. So enough about me, let's talk about my project. So it's about 3 pieces: accessible awareness, accessible resources, and accessible dialogue. So I met with the CDI, which I will get more into later, and we kind of talked about the ways that we thought we could empower this community and bring them together on campus. And we thought these 3 ways kind of holistically looked at the problem that exists and tackled it. So first we have accessible awareness. So as Stephanie mentioned, I did a social media campaign through the CDI. Our idea was that a lot of students on campus, both those with disabilities and those without, didn't know that the CDI had resources or was a space for them. And I found that out in a poll I ran during my junior year. So the idea of this was to kind of just show them while they were home during their summer who the CDI is, who works there, the things they do, the resources they offer, to make it more comfortable so that when they came back on campus, they could walk in that space and feel like they belonged there and know that they did. So this is just the social media page and some of the campaigns that ran. And then that ties very closely into the second idea that we had, which was accessible resources. So there are hundreds of resources out there for those with disabilities, but it's really hard to find them all. And the CDI has a lot of these self-study guides on their website, but there was not a specific one about disability in education, specifically higher ed. So that's what I worked on throughout the summer. It's just the first picture of it, but it's a very long, long resource guide. These are snapshots of it. Don't try to read it right now. It's a lot of words. But it's housed on the CDI's website and will be there for the long term. It'll be updated every year and is a great resource for students when they come looking for resources, for those that are trying to help their friends, for teachers, RAs, honestly anyone. So then that leads us to accessible dialogue. So when talking with the CDI, we realized that there was this gap between those with disabilities knowing that they could walk into the CDI, and we wanted to bridge that. So we decided to have this event called Disability Chat and Chew, and I reached out to those students with disabilities asking them who would want to talk. Would anyone be comfortable enough to come speak? And a lot of them wanted to. So we were able to have this event, and it was really cool because it started that conversation that had been lacking. We left the room, it took 30 minutes longer than we thought it would, starting to talk about changes, things that could be brought to the institution. Faculty was there, and it was wonderful, and we're hoping to be able to do more of these next semester as well. So you might be wondering how. Those were a lot of pieces, one summer. I also had a job and was studying for the LSAT, and I wonder this as well. And I have realized that the only reason that this was possible or even got off the drawing board was because of partnership and community from the beginning of my project to the very end to even keeping it going now. So when looking at partnership, as I stated, I partnered closely with the CDI. During my junior year, I went in and had all of these large ideas of things I was going to change and way I was going to make this campus better. And they were like, realistically, let's tone it down. But at the same time, keep pushing. So we met multiple times. They had a lot of different ideas. But most specifically, Dr. Williams was my go-to, and the CDI was there all summer, met with me every week. Even when she was on vacation, showed up in the Zoom room, answered emails at night when I'd be freaking out, made sure I hit every deadline, and was just always pushing me, and still is helping me plan events. Would not have been able to do my project without that. And on top of it, I have community in general. So I chose this picture from the disability rights movement because I think that really symbolizes the activism that's going on campus today. So as I mentioned earlier, I really turned to the community of those with disabilities, asking them questions like, yes, I have a disability, but that does not mean that I know other people's experiences. So it's wonderful to be able to go to them to get feedback and pushback and ideas that I couldn't have come up with on my own. But on top of that, I also turned to my community of friends and family that don't have disabilities and was able to ask them questions of how does this come across? How would you say this? And my point in doing that is because I realized for a movement to get off the ground and to change things, everyone needs to be involved. And this was a crucial piece, and the accountability piece played by this group was huge. So my final thoughts. So I am extremely proud of my project, but more than anything, I'm thankful for those that helped it become what it is. I did not do this on my own at all. I'm also very proud to say now that I'm proud of my disability, and I'll talk about it in groups, and that's a weird space. So just thank you to all of you. That's all.
Awesome, thanks, AK. So next up, we have Barry Henaku, who's a Fox Clark Civic Scholar from Chicago. I should have mentioned this earlier. So our two civics who were not in St. Louis was Barry, who spent his summer in Chicago, and Sarah N., who spent their summer in DC. So our one out-of-towner for today. He's majoring in mathematics and classics, and his project focused on collecting narratives from people of color in STEM. Over the summer, he interviewed academics from undergraduates to professors in an effort to highlight their stories and learn about civic engagement in higher education. And have it just not be muted.
So hi, I'm Barry, and my story begins with Professor Ed Ray Goins. And so I first heard of this article when I was in high school, and I felt a number of complex emotions. I felt fear about going into this field, inspiration, empathy, and most of all confusion about why he was the only one and why the community was so small. But it turns out this wasn't only a problem with mathematics. I'm also a classicist, and classics was facing its own reckoning. And classics is rooted in whiteness, but to me, it seemed like the problem was a deeper thread. And it seemed like higher education needed to come to terms with how to make its space more inclusive for others to participate in. And so, where's the problem? So, well, first, 12.3% of the US population is Black, but a much smaller population of the US, a much smaller population of faculty are people of color. And so academia is not a meritocracy, contrary to popular belief, and scientific talent is distributed equally. And so I wanted to know what ways can I patch this leaky pipeline. And so I spoke to Federico Ardila, who's most known for the Ardila's axioms, and these are ways to cultivate diversity in the spaces that you're interested in. And so these should not be revolutionary ideals, but considering they should be common sense, but considering our current practices, it's obvious that this is not the case. And so for my summer project, I wanted to parallel the work done by MathHad. So MathHad essentially tracks and identifies mathematicians of the African-American African diaspora. And so I thought the key to fix this problem would be mentorship and essentially highlighting the narratives from people of color in STEM. And so to begin, I started with the mentorship component. And I gathered 5 of my most talented friends to do this. And so I want to inspire the love of STEM that my mentors had done for me. And so we eagerly began developing projects in different disciplines for people to participate in. And we petitioned local groups to invite students to join. And this manifested itself in the Project for Better Education. So this would be a one-on-one mentoring program for students where we led them and guided them through projects. But it turned out to be extremely difficult to find students. I mean, I was absolutely shocked. Students didn't want to spend their summer doing mathematics. Can you believe it? But I learned a lot of lessons in planning, and I pivoted to my next project, which was the STEM with Color, where my goal was to collect narratives from people and highlight them and sort of learn what ways people were engaging civically in the mathematics community. And I wanted to highlight the stories of others. And so this was the podcast that I made. And I was helped by these 4 wonderful women. And so these women run the network for minorities in mathematical sciences. And I don't think professors on vacation over the summer are too excited to hear from students, but these people helped me connect with a lot of people and find people who had interesting stories that I could tell. And so I thank them for all of their efforts in this project. And so during the project, I found a number of pockets of communities that I'd be excited for working at. So not surprisingly, it turns out HBCUs were like the highest producers of doctoral students. And so I interviewed these 4 people from Morehouse, and they showed me the different ways that history had developed and like how African Americans had come to be more prevalent. And I also was invited to participate in CARMS next year. I missed this because I was in Chicago, but CARMS was a conference that was started in the early 2000s. And originally, it was a very small community, but because of the people here, they've raised the community to be much larger. So this is one of the examples of things that I intend to participate in the future and later. And so since then, I've been invited to attend a number of conferences. This conference is not CARMS, but it's the Field of Dreams conference. And I came here, this was in the fall, where these were a couple of undergraduates who I interviewed. And I got to meet them at these conferences where I was presenting my work over the summer in a presentation there. And I also got to go to another conference where I also met a large community. And so the goal moving forward now for my project is to sort of spread my work at conferences and also engage with the community that I feel like entering in the future, which is maybe the mathematics one. And so since then, I've been excited to meet these people, and I'd like to thank all the people that I met from my journey. And so this is a small snippet of all of the people that I've interviewed, but they've taught me all insightful lessons through my process. I would be indebted, and I'm definitely in debt to them about all the insights they showed me. And so I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't invite you to listen to the podcast. So a quick Google search, we can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Overcast. Of course, the fall semester has become busy, so I only do have 2 episodes out. But I do plan to create more episodes later on, and I hope you'll take a listen and tell me what you think of the podcast. So thank you.
So for our last Civic Scholar in this first section of 4, and then we'll invite all 4 of them back up for questions from the audience, is Akshay Govindan, who's a Fox Clark Civic Scholar from St. Louis, Missouri. His project involved working with the Brown School Social Policy Institute to conduct social policy research in 2 areas: understanding the impact of the pandemic on non-English speakers and investigating the effect of the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative Housing Redevelopment Program on youth outcomes.
Yes, so when I was kind of planning my civics summer, I knew I wanted to do something at the intersection of research and community-focused work. And as I kind of showed here, I thought of these at the time as 2 different spheres. Research existing sort of in a vacuum, with the output being papers and publishing and at universities, and community-focused work kind of occurring on the ground and in communities. So to kind of bridge those 2 together, I wanted to find a partner that did both of those things. And fittingly here at WashU, the Social Policy Institute at the Brown School does just that, doing data-centric but also community-focused work that kind of ties those 2 spheres together. And while at the Brown School and at the Social Policy Institute, I worked on 2 different projects, which I'll kind of go over today in some detail. The first one being looking at the impact of the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative in St. Louis. So this is an initiative that's currently being run by the Department of Housing and Urban Development to revitalize neighborhoods across the country and cities. And one of the cities that got a grant was St. Louis. So we kind of were wanting to look at, through a funded project, the impact of housing redevelopment in the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative on youth outcomes and in particular education. So it was kind of unknown how these 2, or how housing redevelopment and factors in housing redevelopment impact educational outcomes. So that's why I kind of put this question mark to show that we were looking at what factors sort of determine the outcomes and how those kind of can be linked to housing redevelopment. And what was really cool about this project was the incorporation of Urban Strategies Incorporated, which is a community organization that kind of played a major role in the oversight of C&I in St. Louis, but they were also part of the planning process for the project and kind of downstream analysis in the project. So seeing this community organization kind of being involved directly in the oversight and planning of the project was really cool, and sort of bridging the gap between community work, but also with research kind of in an academic setting. So my role in the project in particular was sort of to investigate the factors and kind of the theoretical factors as to why housing redevelopment, both on a micro scale, like in households, and on a macro scale in neighborhoods, can sort of have an effect on youth outcomes. And that's sort of in progress now. We're working towards writing a theory paper that is to be submitted soon. The second project I worked on was looking at the socioeconomic impact of COVID, in particular the impact on non-English speakers. So this survey conducted by the SPI was a really large survey conducted over the course of 2020 to 2021 across the country, asking a wide range of questions ranging from social, emotional, mental, and physical well-being. And here's kind of a summary of the overview of the survey. So it started in the spring of 2020, like April 2020, all the way to more than a year after, with roughly 2,000 to 5,000 participants per wave. So using this data set, I wanted to address a few questions, namely the problem of language barriers and seeing how language barriers have a big impact both on access to social, legal, and health services. I wanted to use this data set to sort of answer those questions. And importantly, the pandemic really exacerbated those issues. And this is sort of a subset of the news articles about those issues in the pandemic, but we can kind of see how language barriers that were exacerbated by the pandemic led to problems with testing, getting access to testing, but also in care and navigating the medical space in general for non-English speakers. So I wanted to investigate a few different areas, and the first that I'll kind of focus on today was the gig economy. And the gig economy is roughly defined as on-demand labor, on-demand jobs that are kind of temporary, freelance, and those were really important during the pandemic when obviously things were very virtual, in-person kind of work was scarce, and the gig economy played a big role, as I'll show, in the non-English speaking population. So kind of using the data set, I want to ask this question, and here's some of the results, kind of an overview. So here we can kind of see, if we look at the survey responses in terms of whether participants answered yes or no, whether they work in the gig economy, there's an enrichment, sort of an increase in Spanish speakers, the green color, in the yes category, showing that Spanish speakers kind of rely more on the gig economy than English speakers. And if we stratify that by whether gig economy was their main job, the trend is sort of more striking and the disparity is more striking in terms of Spanish speakers relying on gig jobs as their main job in the yes category. And further, if we split that down by whether this was kind of a source of high importance for their income, the trend even becomes more striking with there being sort of a gradient as you go from the income being really important. There's an enrichment of Spanish speakers in that category, suggesting that kind of as you go from the income being more important to less important, there are more Spanish speakers as you go, and less Spanish speakers in the low important categories, so sort of suggesting that Spanish speakers really rely heavily on the gig economy for their income. And so kind of going back to the first slide, I wanted to just summarize the main takeaway of my summer, which was that research and community focus work kind of exist, or rather coexist, and sort of a back and forth process where research feeds into community work, and community work kind of supplies an infrastructure and foundation for research. Thank you.
Going together. So this is our trial year of separating the two, or separating the cohort into half. So our first four went. So any questions from folks in the audience for either one or all of our civic scholars? Yes, thanks, Bob.
So you talk about language barriers. How about cultural competence within language? People's understanding of what you're saying, the same words in different languages, but they mean different things.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a really important point you bring up. And I guess given like the source of the data, like the type of data in terms of the survey responses, that question wasn't explicitly asked, but I think that would be a really cool thing to kind of investigate on more of a qualitative standpoint, like interviewing respondents and kind of seeing what their ideas of the meaning of certain words, for example, in a medical context or in general. But yeah, given like the nature of the data, I think it was kind of hard to look at that in particular, but definitely would be interesting to follow up on that.
Yeah, because in some countries people say yes when in other countries they say no to the same question.
Yeah.
And so it gets a little complicated when it comes to the competency of the culture you come from as well as the language you speak.
Definitely. Thanks.
Sarah, congratulations on trying to make your program sustainable. I think at the end of your presentation, you said you're in search for a faculty sponsor.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, if you
What
know
exactly
anybody.
do you need?
So I need somebody who is faculty at WashU that would be willing to partner with the club to sign an agreement with us and have occasional meetings and support with us so we can get recognized by the student union and by campus life. So again, if you know anybody, my email is sarahb@woostall.
Genesis?
Yes, this question is for Barry. Thank you so much for sharing the great work that you did over the summer with researching and connecting with other scholars in the academic area of math. I'm curious to know what long-term trends do you forecast seeing in the recruitment of people of color into the academic discipline of math?
Yeah, I definitely see it's trending very positively upward, mainly because it's sort of like a rising tide effect, where like the more people there are in the field, the more people they will mentor to be in the field. So there's already been like a significant amount of growth, and there's been a lot of dedication to like undergraduate programs that are sort of like dedicated to increasing representation in sort of the doctoral sciences. I guess our only competition would be like, the recruiting from other like tech jobs. So that's the only sort of like reason I see why there wouldn't be a direct increase in sort of like underrepresented minorities in like these STEM topics. But I think overall in STEM, we'll definitely see an increase in that sort of aspect.
Cassie, did I see your hand? Okay.
So Sarah, I apologize if it's the beginning of your presentation, but the student move-out donation was a source of books for your program. And so this isn't really a question, but it's an offer to continue that as a resource both for books and then also games that students leave behind. We'd love to be a source for your center.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, the student move out. Actually, in my final write-up, I believe that we received 250 books from you guys, which was amazing. The 250 books that were put into the library. So, thank you so much.
That's really cool. We have one more question. No pressure. If not, we'll transition on. Yeah, Stephanie.
When you think back to what you imagined for your civic summer at the point that you were applying to the program, to where you are now, that you can reflect on your civic summer, what did you learn about what is necessary and possible when you're trying to achieve civic impact? That's for any of you.
Do you want to do like a line? Volunteering, of course, Sarah.
Sure, of course. Well, I think in my speech I talked a lot about collaboration and community, and I think the most important thing was really, like I said, the village and making sure that the community was really at the center, because I'm not sure if the kids would have been as excited about the library if we hadn't asked them what they wanted to see, or we hadn't asked them what books they wanted, because I mean, who would be excited if they weren't involved? And then seeing the value of each person at the JDC in making that project happen, like Officer Lovelace, the people at the front desk who always knew to let me in at a certain time. Just collaborating with community was so important, and one thing that I'll carry with me forever.
Yeah, I hate to copy that, but I will continue on with the community idea. I didn't realize how important it was to partner with someone and be in community with an organization that has knowledge and also power. So for me, like I said, yes, I could have made a resource guide, but the impact that it's going to have would not be near what I hope it does if I hadn't partnered with the CDI and if they hadn't been willing to let me work with them. So I think, you can have all these great ideas and a passion, but really finding an organization that's doing the work and has the resources and the guidance that you don't have on your own is crucial.
I hate to further copy, but just echoing what Sarah and AK said, I think at first when I was planning my summer, I wanted to sort of do like a standalone, like by myself, collect my own data, and I think just knowing what's feasible versus what is practical and possible. Like the SBI, like AK said, provided sort of infrastructure, and they had sort of, I guess, power and credence. So the fact of just like disseminating your data or your results, even on like the SPI website, is just so much easier than, or so much, it can reach a larger audience in a much easier way than just doing something on your own.
Yeah, and so I think sort of echoing that point as well, I think one of the biggest differences was I feel like I had a very naive definition of civic engagement when I was entering. And so the largest thing that I learned was sort of getting a lot of information about what other people were doing in the spheres that I was interested in entering. And so I feel like knowing what other people were doing sort of leads me to know what is feasible, what is possible with help, and what you can learn to do. And so that was, I think, the biggest shift for me.
Well, thanks all. Do you guys want to pass off the mics to Racquel? So I'm now going to pass the mic to my co-MC, who also happens to be my co-instructor extraordinaire, Dwayne T. James. So Dwayne was one of the co-instructors for the class of 2022 Civic Scholars, now class of 2023, and class of 2024. So I'm just saying he knows what he's doing. So you are in good hands for the second half.
I can't do anything. Thank you, everyone. You are good. All right. My name is Dwayne T. James. I am one of the co-facilitators. So with that, we'll keep this moment going and this movement happening. So with that, we'll have Racquel come up. She's a Fox Clark Civic Scholar from Oak Park, Illinois. Her project focused on psychological interventions to improve student outcomes in math classes. Everyone knows I love math. Including designing and leading a summer math program, researching and implementing psychological interventions, and creating a website for educators to use the same tools in their own classroom. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, so like you just heard, I'm a math major. So that's what I kind of wanted to center my summer on, because math is not a popular subject. Everyone says it's their hardest class, they don't know it, and I hear a lot of times that I'm not a math person, but you don't hear that about other subjects. And to me, that really stands out because math is something we use every day and everyone uses no matter what career path you take. And so I really wanted to focus my summer on kind of figuring out how this could be improved in classrooms for students to really improve their math learning and get to the root of like why this is even happening. And so to do that, I partnered with the Thomas Dunn Learning Center in St. Louis, and I did a free like 5-week program called Gain a Gift Card with Math in the Real World. So it was centered on shopping, because shopping is something that involves a lot of math and that everyone uses in life, no matter where you are. And so that is what the theme of my summer camp was, to kind of get students to realize a theme that like math is used everywhere. And so I really took the first part of my summer to plan out an effective program, and so a lot of it was meeting with professors who had expertise in this. So one professor really taught me about psychological interventions that could be done to improve student outcomes in learning and math, and also talking about cultural pedagogy and having culturally relevant pedagogy to get buy-in with students. And so a lot of that included having discussions. And so even though it was math and there was math that was done, a lot of it was just having discussions about math. And this was one of the qualitative measures I had about students to track their progress. And then I also had quantitative measures, which include this math anxiety self-test that I learned about from one of my professors, which turned out to be a big part of my summer. And I also had a pre and post test of the material I covered, like in relation to shopping, like the sales tax and all that I learned. And so all of these measures were really impactful and helped a lot. And apart from that, I had a few different activities, and so these are pictures from one activity I did that was like taking pictures of anywhere you see math. It was the first activity we did, and so if you look at this might be like random pictures, but you can see like geometry, parallel lines, and all of these show how math is really everywhere around us, and just looking at that can really help students. And a big part of my summer was also writing. A lot of the psychological interventions were writing, which is not common in math classrooms, but it turns out to really improve student outcomes. Just writing about your values or writing a letter to your younger self endorsing like a growth mindset can be really effective and was effective. And so this is like not one of my students, but what it kind of looked like the first day. She was like forced to go there. She didn't want to come to the camp. But by the end was loving it, was so sad when it ended. She's like, this is the last Monday, this is the last Thursday, and all the students really improved on the math anxiety scores, on the qualitative measures of the discussions and all that. And then I got the opportunity impromptu to go into another camp to kind of have a mini part. It was just a 10-minute lesson to talk with students about how math is everywhere and everywhere around us, and how everyone can use math and everyone does use math more than you realize. And so this kind of inspired my last part of my summer, which was making a website called like Math in the Real World, Psychological Tools for Math Learning. So it's using everything I learned and did this summer and making it accessible for more teachers and educators to use in their own classroom to have an impact on more students. And so it includes all the interventions I did and ways to find more interventions on their own, and also a how I feel about math questionnaire, which is the same questionnaire you saw before, but without anxiety, as that can kind of throw students off. And so I have this adapted version for teachers to use themselves instead of having to make their own. And then I also have a blog section where I talk about my story and what I did over the summer in more detail, and more about the discussions we had. And so the problems a lot of students, the main themes students said were problems in math classes, and easy ways to fix them. So the whole idea was to make it really accessible for teachers to use this website as much as they want, in much detail or not detail that they want, and really have little things that they can actually do in their classrooms. And so I just wanted to refocus on math anxiety, because that's what really is the mental block in these classrooms, and I think this cycle really shows how it can affect a lot of us, and I think it affects most of us in our lives, and it can lead to a lot of trouble in math, even though we all use math and all of us know how to do math. And so my goal in the future is to continue working on this website, going into more schools, connecting with more teachers, doing professional development, and I'm also planning on being a math teacher, so I think this is something I'm going to continually be working on. And I'm also doing research on math anxiety now, so all of it, I think, is a continuous process that I will be like continuously updating on my website. So yes, thank you.
Future hashtag math in the real world. I mean, take a picture and post it on up. Make sure it happens. I like it. All right, next up is Kyra, a Fox Clark Civic Scholar from St. Louis, Missouri. She is majoring in Global and Cultural Studies in the School of Arts and Sciences and minoring in art in the Sam Fox School of Art and Design. Kyra partnered with the International Institute of St. Louis to design and facilitate the Teen Summer Learning Program, a 3-week program focused on improving communication skills and mental well-being for, I'm like, what's going on? All right, mental well-being for immigrants and refugees ages 14 to 21. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
So yeah, my name is Kyra. Communication and practices of physical and mental well-being. There's a lot to say about this incredible experience. I'm going to do my best to keep in time with the slides, and faces of the students are blurred for confidentiality purposes. Over here. There we go. Okay, I come from a family of Syrian refugees, among other Arab immigrants, and I believe that in the U.S. we have a privilege and a duty to make everyone feel as warm and welcome as we can. My first semester at WashU, I joined the Legacies for Immigrants and Refugees Club and began tutoring youth at the International Institute of St. Louis after-school program. Once COVID hit, many of the students' access to support and their now online classes was cut off. So attending online school requires stable Wi-Fi, access to a device, and most of these students had neither or only one. So I organized a tablet drive through the Institute, wrote an article, and got more involved. There are currently over 100 million forcibly displaced individuals worldwide, which is a record number. Over half of all refugees are under the age of 18. In 2020, nearly 1 in 3 children living outside their countries of birth were child migrants, compared to less than 1 in 20 adults, so that number is striking. And basically, in designing this program, I wanted to do whatever would bring the students the most joy and benefit them the most. So I surveyed students at the after-school program, and they said a topic that they really wanted to focus on was communication. It's really hard to communicate when you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, and so we developed this program. So working within the pre-existing Institute framework for summer programs, we created Let's Communicate, which is a program divided into 3 parts to try to cover the 3 bases of the topic of communication. So week 1 was at the heart of what I wanted to do in the first place. Available research shows that self-exploration through creativity is one of the best methods to encourage confidence and communication in refugee youth. So students were provided with journals, we went on nature walks, we did a lot of self-exploration, and students made mood boards to introduce themselves. It was really just about sustaining and building a community, and we did a lot of practices that I learned in the Civic Scholars, actually. So week 2 was about communication with others. Now we got this basis of communication with ourselves. We did speed interviewing, where students had to tell themselves over and over, tell me about yourself. We learned about cultural introductions around the world. And then the final week, we had a professor from a local college, he teaches communication, come in and have us do public speaking. We did improvisation, things like the power of no. We had students think about long-term goals. We had a graduation ceremony and went to the zoo. It was a lot of fun, and it was really great to see the progress. So on the last 2 days of camp, we conducted a post-assessment, which is tricky in itself, but the results were really positive. So 100% of students said that the camp helped them practice English with public speaking and meeting friends. 95% said that they gained confidence with English and understanding different cultures. 90% said they improved their communication skills. And one of my favorite statistics is, did you improve your self-confidence? 100% of the students said yes, which was basically the goal of the program in essence. So in that sense, I really felt like we did succeed a little bit. And getting to watch them flourish in real time was really cool. We saw the confidence come out of a lot of students, which was fantastic. So some of my main takeaways include there's a lack of prioritization and funding and general understanding of refugee youth mental health, which might come from this Western culture-dominated field. And something I wish I'd stuck in on more was there's a lot of imposter syndrome going through this program, and I wish I'd stayed true to my ideas a little bit more. So it's not that people don't care about refugee youth, they do, but these institutions are bureaucratic, underfunded, and overworked. So survival is the priority, not necessarily thriving. But a few studies that do exist show that among refugees under 8 years old, 80% experience mental problems going far beyond PTSD. So when I've always thought about who's working with refugee youth, I think about Angelina Jolie, not psychologists. And it makes me wonder if academics just don't see a lot of self-promotion in this work. It's really hard to sustain relationships. There's full confidentiality. You can't release names. The students aren't getting a voice in this research because it's fully confidential. So it's really hard to find research on the subject. And going forward, the refugee crisis isn't going to get any better. With climate disasters on the rise, the Institute for Economics and Peace predicts there will be 1.2 billion displaced persons by 2050, and the US is not immune. So doesn't it seem like we should be placing more importance on the well-being of refugee youth who may soon be leading us and the next generation in survival and teaching about migration? Thank you.
Fabulous. Improving their self-confidence. I like it. All right. Next up, we have Maya, a Fox Clark Civic Scholar from San Francisco, California. Her project engaged with Earth Dance Organic Farm School in Ferguson and aimed to improve food access in neighboring areas. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maya, and I spent the summer working with Earth Dance Organic Farm School up in Ferguson. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about how we can use urban farming to interact with communities in order to improve community health, and also how we can use it to effect systemic change within food systems. Starting with this question, this is a big one. Is it about physical health, mental health? Is it about neighborhood health, family health, or is it a combination of all of the above? This summer I had the chance to really interact with this question, but before I jump into that, I'm going to jump back in time a little bit. So when I was a first year, I joined the Vernon Kumquat, which is WashU student-run garden, and it was more than just worms and digging in the dirt, although it was definitely a lot of that. This is where I learned about the network of urban farms in St. Louis, and really importantly, when I first learned about the work that Earth Dance was doing. So I reached out to Earth Dance last year with kind of the broad goal of improving community health through equitable access to food. And this is obviously a goal that they had as well. They've been around since 2008. And we quickly identified the Pay What You Can organic farm stand as a space I could plug into with the general goal of using an equitable business model to improve access to food. There was like a lot of ways we worked with this, but these are the two main things I worked on. We created a coupon that could be sent out to the local community in order to raise awareness about the existence of the farm stand, and also a nutrition board, which included nutrition information, cooking tips, and recipe ideas for people who are perhaps encountering this produce for the first time. While we were doing this work, it was really important for us to engage with the local community. So we worked a lot with Earth Dance's outreach committee, which just involved neighbors interested in the work, in order to really tailor our work to what the community wanted, not just what we thought they might want. And then really important to my summer was speaking with the apprentices, the staff, the community members, even the chickens at the farm, being able to build relationships and being in a space where people were really passionate about the same things that I was and about finding new ways to be creative about farming in order to improve health was really useful. And we moved beyond just the scope of the farm and its patrons, but also into WashU. This summer, we had the opportunity to invite a group of students from SPARK, which is a sustainability training program at the Office of Sustainability. And this was really a full circle moment for me, being able to build bridges between WashU and also this great organization that I've been working with. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit now to St. Louis, why it matters that we're here. This is a city where food insecurity has very important impact. And so it's important to perhaps look for alternatives into where we can find food sources for people. So I'm going to introduce two terms that really ground in my project. So the first one is food apartheid. This is an emerging term that's starting to become used to replace the term food desert, which has been criticized for not really including the social roots of the issue of food insecurity. So food apartheid instead tries to focus on social issues, historical issues that have led to these lacks of access to food in given neighborhoods. And the second is food sovereignty. And this is the idea that people who consume foods and grow foods should have the right to control the systems of food production. And also includes the idea that people have the right to culturally appropriate food as well as the right to define their own agricultural systems. Now, in the context of food apartheid, we really wonder what can communities do to combat the issue of food insecurity. This is where urban farms can really play an important role. A lot of urban farms are multifaceted organizations. They can offer childcare, they can be associated with schools, with neighborhoods, and they can offer different kinds of health and community resources. These are 6 types of health. You might be wondering, how can urban farms interact with all of them? I think with physical, it's pretty obvious, healthy foods and exercise, but there's also more abstract types of health that we can interact with as an urban farm. So for example, Earth Dance had a series of plays for families that they held at their farm, and this could perhaps help with social and emotional types of health. And environmental health, creating green spaces in cities can be really helpful. There's of course spiritual health. This is perhaps me as a farmer speaking, but I think it's hard to leave a green space without feeling a sense of serenity and connection to the earth. Okay, in the future, I hope to work in medicine. So this project has been really instrumental for me in order to redefine what health can really mean, what medicine can really mean. I think urban farming and the work that Earth Dance is doing can be viewed as a transgressive form of action against really harmful food systems that are currently in existence and show how food can become medicine. Thank you.
Great job, wonderful job. All right. Next up, last but not least, Otto B. Bob and Gerry Virgil, Civic Scholar from Chicago, is double major in economics and political science in the College of Arts and Sciences. His project focused on improving data fluency among the social sector and nonprofit staff in St. Louis. He helped develop the Recognizing Diversity in Data Micro-Credential with the St. Louis Federal Reserve and Data Science module for the Social Impact Initiative. So with that.
Do I even have to present? That was pretty much. Oh, I was going to say. Yeah. So as Dwayne noted, I'm Otto, and I spent the summer working with the Data Science for Social Impact Initiative out of the Brown School and the Social Policy Institute, really focusing on 2 projects, both of which centered on data. One focusing on economic data with the St. Louis Fed, and the other focusing on local St. Louis data, statewide data, as well as national data. So this all gets its start back in 2020. It's the pandemic. I'm out there enumerating door to door with the US Census Bureau and really thinking about this question, where did these data go? So I'm collecting these data, but what happens with that? So that kind of was the spark for this whole project that led into sorting through lots of different data sources. So you've got national sources, you've got statewide sources, and you've got local sources, all of which provide different information to people in social sector and nonprofit organizations within St. Louis, but also, of course, around the country. So the point of this project this summer was to kind of sift through this and develop this model, focusing on what these different data sources can offer to people doing this really important work in nonprofits, how you use national data that includes statewide and local data, how you can look to the state of Missouri and see what kind of resources are out there that are put together by the state, and also thinking about what resources exist in St. Louis. This manifested itself in online modules. These launched earlier this month through the Social Policy Institute and really focus and center community members. So they really look towards social sector staff around the country and say, why are you using these data? Why does data matter for you? A large part of my project was putting together these guides, so accessing data in St. Louis. So using and kind of diving into a lot of these different resources that exist, going step by step through screenshots, looking at how these can be used, looking at how different folks have used them in the past, and going into this a little more, these are looking at geographies, so the St. Louis city government puts out a lot of data. What topics are covered by these data? If you're looking at the main website, what are the ways that you can kind of cut this bridge and cut this runway for understanding how to use these data and how to use them more effectively? Second piece, focusing on recognizing data or diversity in data, and this is through the St. Louis Fed, so thinking about economic data, thinking about income inequality, gender gaps, as well as racial gaps that exist. So there are a lot of different data out there that are economically related, and really focusing on how we can disaggregate those. So for example, visualizing racial gaps, this is the module that's openly, freely accessible for anyone who wants to take it online. Thinking about economic or racial gaps in economic data, hands-on practice using FRED, which is the Federal Reserve Economic Data. So for example, you have unemployment. So we all know unemployment spiked during the pandemic in 2020. This is the typical chart that you see thinking about unemployment up near 15%, and then kind of this decline over time down to near record lows, back to near pre-pandemic levels. What you don't necessarily see with this is when you break out unemployment data by race, there are kind of some racial groups that are lagging behind the aggregated national unemployment rate. So the black unemployment rate has remained higher than the white unemployment rate and the national unemployment rate. So this is really important for social sector groups working on employment and thinking about these kinds of things. Moving forward, it's really important that people in St. Louis are using and kind of thinking about these resources, working with additional nonprofits to get their feedback, incorporate additional data sources that I might have missed or that they want to include or that are being developed right now. Broader implementation throughout the Midwest. So thinking about not just St. Louis, but this can serve as a model for other states, other cities around the country that are, there are social sector groups in every state, in every city. So what can these other organizations take from the work that I've done and how can they implement them locally or at a statewide level? And finally, of course, you have broader policy implications. So, we saw a lot of data disaggregation and data collection during COVID-19. If Congress and state legislatures, put into the legislation and future funding for future programs, either funded or unfunded mandates to ensure that data are collected, that's really essential. And kind of these final thoughts, similar to what a lot of folks have been talking about today, is that community really makes this possible, and I couldn't have done this without the folks up here and also in the room. I learned a lot from being in St. Louis this summer that, it's a summer that I'll remember for the rest of my life, and really making sure that everyone was involved was central. So thank you.
All right, get your questions ready. Invite the group on up.
Such a bad picture.
All right, what questions do we have? Any questions via Zoom by chance? Questions? Oh, there we go.
I have a question for Kyra. Yeah. So you mentioned there are some ideas that you would have liked to do that you didn't end up doing. I'm curious if you are willing to share some of those and maybe how you want to implement them in your future work.
Yeah, so it's definitely more, I would say, in this collaborative process with the Institute, who were lovely to work with. But I would say it was more about, thoughts that I had that kind of working within the institution, there were limits that we couldn't go, whether it was funding, they have to follow their grant regulations. So kind of, I think that, you know, there's so little research on what works for refugee and immigrant youth mental health that I think that going outside of the bounds that we currently have is necessary, because clearly what we have, it's not great. So I kind of wish that I could have pushed that a little bit further, done some more of that creativity exploration. But it was definitely just working with the partner was fantastic, but I would love to explore working with their arts organizations all around the world that work with, you know, students in refugee camps and explore different sorts of creativity practices. And that's something that I would have liked to get into a little bit more, but that's something that I think I will have to go partner to partner. There's just different institutions that do that, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask something kind of similar, but you mentioned there was some imposter syndrome, and I was wondering, you know, if that's something that others might have felt in this role, and if you could just dig into that a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah, before I pass this over, I will definitely say the people that I worked with at the International Institute were so amazing. And as I said, they're so overworked and underfunded that when I came to them and I said, I want to do a project with you, they basically said, great, come to us with whatever you want and we'll do it. Which, you know, obviously there were limitations once I got there, but I was terrified. I have no qualifications in psychology, in working with youth. I'm a student. So working with a community where you're going to have an impact like that is really scary, because you don't want to do the wrong thing and you don't want to do more harm than good. And so there was definitely some imposter syndrome going in, working with people who have been in the industry for 25 years, and me coming in as a student just with a few ideas to try something new is really scary. But I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think joining any community that you're not a part of can be scary, and it's important to do it the right way to not cause any harm. And so I think for me and my project, I really focused on we'd do shopping field trips where students got to use money and they'd plan like budgeting and like shopping. And so I made sure to shop in like local communities so I could get to know the community more and it would be more related to the students, which I think helped me like get through that. And then parents would come along through that too. So then it was a good way to like connect with the community for me.
I would say also, I mean, I was working a lot with data, but working a lot with communities of people who use data on a regular basis. And a lot of kind of the DSSI slogan is, you know, everyone is a data person. So whether or not you're the primary person in your organization that's tasked with handling data-related things, or if you're just someone who, you know, works with spreadsheets all day, but, you know, your role isn't primarily data. So I was learning a lot from kind of what the social sector looks like in relationship to how people are interacting with different sources online, and really taking that and infusing that into the work that I was doing. So a lot of learning that took place, but also, you know, I didn't know a lot about everything that I was doing before I started, so it was a lot of learning for me too.
I think those have been really great points, and I'll add on like one tiny thing. I was lucky that at Earth Dance, there's already kind of an existing framework for internships and people to come into that. But of course, it was still really intimidating to be like, I have an idea, can I join? I think what's helped me a lot personally when it comes to imposter syndrome is kind of remembering that all these people who started these community organizations, they also all started from zero. And it's just a matter of like people coming together and starting all these organizations. Like everyone started with one idea. You know, maybe they didn't even have expertise in the field, but by bringing in people who do know about it and learning about it, it just helped me like relax a little bit when it came to being intimidated.
Yeah, I'm curious for what you all, and I would ask that of the other group too. What do you want to be when you grow up from what you learned from this work? Are you, any of you taking it into the future? Besides just learning how to work as a group, but are any of you taking this work and saying, I want to go do this as a career?
I mean, I can start. I'm going to be a math teacher, and I also am now considering like a PhD in math or math education, because I've done a lot of research in education, and I think this summer was really impactful for that, because I'd have like a 40-minute drive commute there, and so on the way back I'd just be so happy. So it was like really reinforced the idea of wanting to do that as a career, and then possibly it's cool to have the website to just continue to add on throughout my career, and then if I continue to do research.
Okay. Yeah, that is my most terrifying question. I don't know what I want to do as a job, but I will say working with these students at the Institute is by far the most fulfilling experience I've ever had. And I think that one thing that this experience was great for is it maybe didn't tell me exactly what I want to do, but it did help cancel out a few factors along the way. So, you know, I learned some of the difficulties of working within such a large institution that is funded by the government and versus working with a grassroots NGO, things like that. So it definitely gave me some more experience in the matter, but I can't tell you what I want to do.
I've always answered this question the same way from the time I was 3, and that's I want to be Buzz Lightyear when I grow up. But in all seriousness, I think a lot of what I did this summer relates to skills and to skill building, and I don't necessarily know if I'll be a primary data person doing this kind of work in a social sector organization, but I know that I'll have the skills and the ability to kind of, you know, look at an issue and say, well, where can we find the data? Go out there and explore, developing those competencies to really, you know, tackle those large issues, and then have the understanding and ability to look out and say, you know, there's data missing here, so that can be something that we can improve upon, or this is where these data are located, let's understand them and implement them into the work that I end up doing.
Yeah, I'm trying to become a doctor. The application cycle is currently sucking the soul out of me. But I do hope to, you know, go into public health in some domain. I think for me, I don't know if it's going to be urban farming, but doing community-based work as a doctor and like kind of reinventing what health interventions can look like would be the ultimate goal.
Racquel, I had more of a suggestion than a question. One of the impressive programs at Washington University in recent years has been how the faculty in the biology department has worked very effectively to improve the quality of science education in high schools across the region. I was impressed by your project and the results you're accomplishing. And it raises in my mind, how can that be spread across the St. Louis region to all students taking mathematics? And one way to do it, and this is my suggestion to you and maybe Stephanie to the Institute, is to take the idea of making this a project to the math department and the psychology department of Washington University and have them take this on the way the biology department did.
Yeah.
So I just suggest in seriousness that you consider that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I didn't know that about the biology department, so I think that's really cool and something I'll definitely look into.
The person you want to talk to is Stephanie, what's her name?
Vicki May.
Vicki May, yes.
Institute for School Partnership.
Okay.
ISP.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. That's really
And they do
cool.
math too. They do math too.
Okay.
It's a science engaging.
Not in this area. Not in the area that you're studying.
Well, maybe not that part, if they do work
But
for
this is
that.
this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I'll definitely look into that because I really like that idea. I think that's the whole goal. Like, how do you spread this? So, thank you.
Okay. We don't have a slide for tomorrow.
You're right.
It's okay. All right.
Well, I wanted to sort of give a closing remark that mirrors my opening one, which I think this is a room full of cheerleaders and champions for all of our 16 Civic Scholars, or 151 Civic Scholars. I know I see a parent in the room, I believe, yes, and some junior Civic Scholars and, you know, faculty and staff from across campus, but I wanted to give a specific shout out. You may have noticed in the introductions or in the program that our Civic Scholars are named scholars, and so some of those donors who contribute to the Gephardt Institute and the Civic Scholars Program are here tonight. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Maxine and Bob over there. You wanna, yes. And Bob Virgil back there. And John and Crystal Berline back there. So thank you all so much. So yeah, thank you for investing in our scholars, both past, current, and future, and for everyone for being here, and I'll leave it to Dwayne to make some things.
I just want to say that I love how we talked about civic engagement is different from what we thought it would be at the beginning and how it turns out now. And what you heard was 8 different ways to do civic engagement, and it shows up differently. But it shows up in community, it shows up in learning, and it shows up in opportunity. And as more we talk about the opportunity that's available to impact the community, the more you see the synergy and the enthusiasm and the passion to make sure that actually happens. So let's not leave this space thinking that we just saw a presentation and great, but let's leave this space understanding that the passion, the opportunity is to continue it and make sure it's sustainable as we continue to move forward. And one thing that we can do is come back tomorrow to hear 8 more possibilities and opportunities. So with that, thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone. What a wonderful group we have gathered tonight. I'm really excited for what's in store, and I'm going to be very quick, but I do want to welcome those who are in the room and also those who are watching via YouTube from all around the country. We know that there are family and friends and fans and supporters who are cheering on our students, both in this room and around the country. For those I don't know, my name is Stephanie Kurtzman, and it's my honor to serve as the Executive Director of the Gephardt Institute for Civic and Community Engagement, which sponsors the Civic Scholars Program. And I just want to say a few words about the Gephardt Institute and about the Civic Scholars Program to provide some context for what we're doing tonight. So very briefly, what we do at the Gephardt Institute is we foster student learning, participation, and impact in civic life. And the ideal outcome of these efforts is that we have fostered civic leaders who are equipped with the knowledge, the skills, the experience, and the lifelong commitment to leave positive change in the civic environment. And we know how important that is, particularly these days. And that we know we need to have passionate and skilled young leaders like our Civic Scholars. So what is the Civic Scholars Program? In essence, this is one of our flagship programs. And to date, we've prepared 151 students and alumni for future civic leadership. Among us, we have half of our 16 seniors presenting tonight. The other half presented last night. They are spending collectively as this group of 16 2 years together, combining academic learning, civic learning, dialogue, listening, and experiential learning together as they prepare as civic leaders. And one of the hallmarks of the Civic Scholars Program is the Civic Summer. And you'll hear about that tonight. What I'll do now is pass to one of our wonderful co-instructors, another Stephanie, who will tell you more about the Civic Summer and about the student presentations that we're honored to hear tonight. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Stephanie. I don't know what it is about a microphone that makes me so much more nervous than just talking. So let me just take a deep breath. Okay, so my name is Stephanie Weisskopf. I am one of the co-instructors of the class of 2023 Civic Scholars, along with Dwayne T. James back there, who you'll hear from later. And it has been one of the greatest privileges of my career here at WashU. As Stephanie alluded to, Civic Scholars is a 2-year program that accompanies 6 academic credits. So our seniors are almost at the end of their 5th credit. But tonight's presentation really wraps up the meaning-making portion of their civic summer. So their junior year was spent in class in the fall, just kind of making a mess of concepts of civic and community engagement. Examining definitions, re-examining, reconstructing, and learning about different functional areas that some might define civic and community engagement. And then spring semester of junior year, we really ask civic scholars to be grant writers. All semester, their assignments culminate in what ends up being about a 16 to 20 page grant proposal for what they will embark as their civic summer. It's totally driven by their own passion area, their own civic interest, and they spend all semester approaching that summer experience with ethics and integrity and the pillars of what we hope makes a healthy relationship within community. So at the 16 seniors that we have, 8 went last night, and I know the program would suggest you would see 8 tonight, but Maurice is out with a really horrible cough, and so he will not be joining us, so we have 7 of the remaining seniors here tonight sharing with you about their summer. Some interesting things, given that we have 151 civic scholars, the legacy of civic scholars. Of these 16, 14 chose to spend their summer in St. Louis, which is pretty atypical given the history of the Civic Scholars Program. I attribute that to this group, their first 2 years largely being on Zoom and really heavily impacted by the pandemic, and demonstrated a sincere interest in investing in their community, of which they had planned on their college career being about. So 14 were here. 1 went to Chicago, which we heard from last night, and 1 went to DC, who we'll hear from tonight. And their civic interests really vary. Our most common kind of intersection was education, but even then, how each person approached their impact within education looks so different, and I think that's the beauty of the Civic Scholars Program. They really get to define what their passions are, what they want their impact on the world around them to be, and you'll get to hear a little bit more about that tonight through our PechaKucha. Fun fact last night, which I'm really embarrassed to learn, it's PechaKucha. Anyone know that? Why didn't you tell me? Well, so I'm going to change my script from last night to tonight to be PechaKucha. So thank you for joining us for that, which really is meant to represent a more conversation or chit-chat style of presenting. So our civic scholars were asked to complete 500 hours of direct impact in a community that they felt passionate about. So wrapping that experience up in a 5-minute presentation in 15 slides that advance every 20 seconds is quite a challenge. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to share, and at the end of 4 scholars, we'll invite them back up for you to ask questions, because likely all of your questions will not be answered in their presentation. So we will have 4 present, invite them back up for questions, and then we will go on to our final 3 for the evening. Before we go on, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for being here. I consider this room a room of cheerleaders and champions of our civic scholars. So if you consider yourselves one of those, could you raise your hand? I know we got some parents in the room. Yes, okay, amazing. And I also know we have some folks who are interested in pursuing the Civic Scholars Program, so I think this is hopefully a good teaser into what your experience might be in pursuing that program. I would be remiss to have one announcement before we go on. I know. So we have two birthdays in the room. I swear it wasn't intentional when we planned the semester that they would both be tonight. But Diamond and Ruchika's birthday are both tonight, so not a great birthday present. So again, my forever apology. I would be mortified if people sang me a song, so I will not ask the room to do that, but you know Dwayne would have, so remember that. Yeah, so a celebratory night in many ways, birthday and presentation. And Thank you again to those who are joining via YouTube. I also know some of our donors are joining in that capacity. So in tonight's program, you'll notice that our scholars all have sponsors who have made the stipend possible for these scholars. So a big thank you to the Stern family, the Seiden family, the Kleinhandler family, and Dr. Olsen and Dr. Marcus. So thank you so much for making this experience possible. And I think I covered all my talking points, even with a microphone. So up first, we have one of the birthday stars themselves, Diamond Warren Tucker, who is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Coral Springs, Florida. She's majoring in dance in the College of Arts and Sciences, and her project focused on increasing access to resources of maternity care for Black women in North St. Louis. Diamond had the opportunity to work with Black Power Blueprint and Common Sense Childbirth Institute to receive her doula certification and mentorship. So with that, let's welcome up Diamond.
I don't know. Okay, so Black women are 3 to 5 times more likely to die to pregnancy-related complications. The maternity mortality rate for Black women in 2019 was 20.8 per 1,000 deaths. And even though the United States is a country that spends the most on healthcare out of the country, it ranks 33 out of 36 for mortality rate. And so my question for this project was what systems were at work, particularly, and why things were going that way. And in my research, I found, as we're surprised, but not really surprised, racism. So one of the policies and things that I've been working on with other doulas in St. Louis and just been going over is the Menimbus Act of 2021. This is an act that is built on existing legislation, 12 bills that has very much so to do with getting Black women the resources that they need, improving mental health resources for pregnant women and things of that nature. I met most of my cohort and the organizations that I worked with this summer at the Black Power Blueprints Farmers Market. That happens every Saturday, 10 to 2, so I spent most of my Saturdays volunteering with them and getting to know the coordinators and members of the North City community. And out of that came the African Doula Project, which is it turned out to be a free thing to train 14 Black doulas in North City, St. Louis. I am one of the 14th. Consisted of 14 modules, 3 live trainings, and then there's also a 6-month mentorship that I'm currently in the process of doing. And just for a little background in terms of what is a doula, we provide physical and emotional support for mothers and birthing families, as well as comfort and relaxation measures. And secondly, the other organization that I worked with and got my certification and getting my certification through is Common Sense Childbirth, the JJ Way. It is a patient-centered, patient-led maternity care system that focuses on supporting the mom and the baby and the family throughout perinatal and pregnancy and postpartum. There are 4 tenets. One of them being access. This is really about getting mothers and birthing families the access to the resources and the knowledge that they need in terms of getting connected to the right providers and things of that nature. Second in that tenet is connection. So this is really about, in my studies and in my research, we found that a lot of women of color, especially Black women, they are very scared about getting connected to their children because they don't really have hope of them surviving or their baby surviving. And so it's really important to really get on that connection aspect, which then leads to knowledge. That is one of our 3rd tenets, and it's really about keeping the patient informed, especially in the current healthcare system now. Doctors just shoot you with a lot of jargon and you don't really know what's going on. And so this is really about breaking down the language and the medical knowledge for pregnant women and birthing families in that process. And last but not least, through that all, that should empower the client. It's very important in the JJ Way and in my own practice that clients and patients are able to make their own decisions and they're empowered with the knowledge that they have. I'm just here to answer questions and support them emotionally and physically. This is really their journey, which goes back to the patient center. And now I'm currently in a mentorship with Black Empowered Doula. It is a doula organization in Florida. I've been working with her for about 2 months, and she's helping me figure out how to get my business off the ground, connecting with clients, networking with other doulas in St. Louis and just across the nation. And yeah, most of my doula network consists of my cohort that I went through my training with, as well as Black doulas in St. Louis, specifically those that serve North City. And so we have a lot of coffee chats. There were a lot of coffee chats early in the summer, and I still meet with some of them, and we talk and we have our conversations and things of that nature. And this design that you've been seeing throughout the slides, that is the design for my doula business that I started this year. Really, again, it's just about keeping the patient-centered, client-centered. I'm really focusing on how to incorporate movement in pregnancy and postpartum for mothers. So that's a really big tenet with my company, and still working. I currently have a client, 6-month-old pregnant mama, baby boy. So we have like 3 months until the baby is here, but yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Diamond. That smile you saw at the end, I could hear through the phone this summer when all the pieces came together. So I just know Diamond's doing exactly what she's meant to be doing right now. So next up we have Rachel Ding, who is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Vancouver, Canada. She's in the 3-2 Masters of Social Work program and majored in anthropology. Her project focused on collaborating with the Office of International Students and Scholars to better support academic and social transitions into higher education in the United States by creating a pilot orientation program called the First Year Experience. So with that, is Rachel.
So for my civic summer, I worked at the Office of International Students and Scholars to develop a pilot program called the First Year Experience, which expanded orientation events into the school year and really went beyond the 2-day orientation programming. So I embarked on this project because international students like myself face additional cultural and legal barriers when living and studying in the United States, and such barriers, unfortunately, were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic as countries introduced lockdowns and travel restrictions, which left students stranded and without any social, emotional support. So given that students faced barriers and a lack of support, I knew that the 2-day orientation program was not enough. Thus, I came up with the idea of the First Year Experience, which expanded programming for international students throughout the school year with monthly informational and social events pertaining to student life and student engagement. Planning this program over the summer, I initially had a timeline for how exactly I wanted the year to run. I had lists and lists of events, but I wanted to inundate students with as much knowledge and as much information sessions as possible. I wanted everything to be perfect. However, planning this program over the summer was actually really supposed to be a collaborative effort between the Office of International Students and I was part of a team, right? I was able to bounce ideas off of Azane and other OISS staff about what the program would really look like now that we had 200 new international students, which is one of the highest. I also had to think about incorporating an equity framework, right? So I had to ask what was lacking in the current 2-day move-in orientation. What do students need? And really understand that international students face additional hurdles more so than domestic students and needed additional programming throughout the school year as we were coming out of a pandemic. With this framework in mind, I've surveyed new international students because I wanted to plan events that catered to the students' needs, right? So students wanted to actually see events related to social bonding, studying in the United States, community engagement, safety, and also career planning, and I distributed this survey in the summer. In the planning process, I was also able to finalize events. So OISS and I were able to meet with community partners such as WUPD, Gephardt, and the Learning Center, and we were able to plan a kickoff this September, which allowed students to reflect on their first few weeks of school, and students wrote letters to their future selves. One moment in the planning process I actually wanted to highlight. So our first information session was with the Learning Center 2 months ago to talk about study skills, time management, and classroom culture. I planned this event during midterm season, really thinking that this would be a space for students to debrief and also learn new time management skills. But nobody showed up to the event. We waited for an hour and a half. So what do we do? What really happened exactly? I felt frustrated in the moment as there was a lot that went into the preparation process, such as meetings and preparing materials and researching best practices for international students. So I felt like that was a moment where I had to learn and had to adapt. So some of the lessons I learned included the fact that, well, it was during midterms, so it was obviously very difficult for students to show up because students might be studying or they have a midterm during when the event was run. And it turns out that simply in our marketing approach, we just sent emails asking students to click a link and sign up. And we realized that we had to do a new approach to have mandatory signups on Eventbrite. So for our most recent Thanksgiving event at South Grand and the International Institute, we had a mandatory sign up of 25 slots. All 25 slots, I believe, were filled and everybody showed up. So looking ahead into this program, I hope this program continues into the school year, and we'll continue to have monthly events such as a career panel and a winter decorating event. And I will be conducting an end of the semester survey just to be able to assess any strengths and areas of improvement for the first year experience. With regards to the long-term vision, I hope that the program will continue on during each school year and becomes a source of community and support for new international students. I'm also thinking about how after I graduate from my master's in social work, how I will be best able to support the students or potentially have this program planning become a practicum or internship. Generally, I think this project has helped me develop both civically and professionally. I was able to engage in a lot of active listening, open dialogue, and most importantly, I had to be adaptive to different situations at hand. I am ultimately really grateful for OISS and Ezine Erzor as my community partner, and I look forward to continuing this work. Thank you.
Up next, we have Sarah Narcisse, who's a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Long Island, New York, and is in the Masters of Public Health candidate at WashU's Brown School and majoring in urban studies. Their project focused on unpacking intergenerational trauma through therapeutic mentorship, formation of support networks, and education of community members on transgenerational trauma.
Summer in DC can be very fun, but it can also be filled with a lot of grief and sadness. In DC, neighborhood beef can cause happy memories to turn sour, causing a cycle of violence, death, and revenge. For my civic summer, I knew I wanted to impact health disparities that impact Black communities. I was looking for an organization that works to increase accessibility to mental health resources and social services for Black communities, and I found In the Streets, an organization that works to combat intergenerational trauma in the Black community. What is intergenerational trauma? All of our experiences have an impact on us. Trauma shapes our thoughts, our feelings, and how we parent. This trauma can be passed down to one's children and create a bunch of negative outcomes, such as chronic illness, substance abuse, and that can disproportionately affect minority communities. In the Black community, mental health can be stigmatized. This is due to hundreds and hundreds of years of systematic racism, biases in mental health practices, and in mental health research that create underdiagnoses for Black and Brown students and misdiagnoses of Black and Brown adults. In the Streets works at the intersection of mental and physical health to combat this trauma. They provide free therapy, support groups, and yoga for community leaders, for community members. And one thing that made me want to join In the Streets was an integration of community members. In Civic Scholars, we talked a lot about how important it is to discuss with the community what you are doing and make sure that your impact is what the community wants and needs. This summer, I came in with 4 goals: to be an additional employee for In the Streets, to find resources that would help minority and Black communities, to learn to be a better, to learn how to better serve Black communities, and to learn how to best network and facilitate relationships between organizations. I work to integrate myself in community, listen to how I can better serve community members, and had a bunch of conversations about what would be best for the community. I served as an additional employee and worked with grant writing and organizational activities. But mostly I built a program for DC's Summer Youth Employment Program. This program was 5 weeks long. It included 15 to 24-year-olds. And in preparation for it, it included watching a lot of Black media, an excuse to watch a bunch of TV, finding excursion sites, an excuse to go through a bunch of DC museums, a bunch of fun activities and games in preparation for icebreakers, but also having a lot of difficult and interesting conversations about what it means to be in community in DC, what the community needs, and what would be best to teach these students. Doing SYEP was not easy. Sometimes the youth weren't receptive to a lot of our lessons at first. We had to adapt and listen to their experiences. We learned that a lot of what we were saying for them, they were desensitized to. We had to really make sure that we were talking to them and listening to them. We had a lot of one-on-one conversations about what would be best. But most of all, we wanted to not just discipline them like they have experienced in school or at jobs, but also to listen to them and be there for them. One thing about community impact I learned is that it's easy to think that you aren't doing enough. I had to learn how to adapt and know that impact looks different depending on the community and the goal. My favorite thing from this community is learning so much more about the community and what makes it special, gaining relationships that will have a lasting impact on me and my life, whether it was with community members or with organizational leaders. And I will take what I've learned from this summer into my future.
And last up for our first section of 4 is Lexie Jordon, who is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Lincoln, Arkansas. It's a double majoring in educational studies and American culture studies and minoring in psychology and brain sciences. Lexie spent her summer supporting public charter school teacher retention and satisfaction while building an online community for educators.
Hi everybody, my name is Lexie, and I used my summer to explore the civic issue of teacher support. I want to look at various levels: systemic, peer-to-peer, and individual to teacher. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to the Stern family. Your financial contribution is amazing and so helpful for students like me to accomplish projects like this. So I grew up in the small rural town of Lincoln, Arkansas, and when I was in high school I had the opportunity to get involved in a group called Student Voice. And what it was a professional development program for teachers that invited students to the table as equals to talk about school culture and how to build a positive school culture. It was this moment that really got me interested in community work and how to support schools. It also really taught me how difficult of a job being a teacher is. And it's not like that job's gotten any easier since the pandemic. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, 50% of schools started the school year understaffed. And the biggest issue with filling those vacancies is finding the people. And so there's also all this anxiety about diminishing teacher pipelines. And what this is turning out to be is that we have a lot of under-certified and inexperienced teachers in their first years who need specialized support in order to help them grow and have these long careers. And so looking at St. Louis more specifically, students who are most likely to be in these schools that have vacancies are students of color and students from low-income households. So this summer, I found an organization called the Missouri Charter Public School Association who welcomed me with open arms, and they were already interested in this teacher support area. So they'd accepted a grant to survey every charter school teacher in the state of Missouri. And I jumped into that data analysis right away. It was overwhelming, it was crazy, and I learned so much. It was absolutely mind-blowing. Throughout my entire project, I've really tried to elevate and amplify the voices of teachers, and so it was these sorts of responses that helped me build my final guide that I made for MCPSA. So we had sections on teacher retention, teacher development, and teacher recruitment. And so at the end of the summer, I left my guide in the capable hands of MCPSA, and it's now in the process of being published as a series of white papers. Something I really kept in mind throughout this whole process was like the gravity of the situation. I was writing not only on behalf of MCPSA, but on behalf of the teachers who trusted us. And I also had to remember like who my audience was. Like I'm writing to charter school leaders all across the state of Missouri. Like that's very significant people to be writing to. But I also wanted to think about how to help teachers talk to teachers. Throughout our classroom curriculum, we've talked a lot about listening to a community and finding sports that work for them. But I couldn't really do that with MCPSA. They'd answered a survey, and now I had to work. So what I did was I created this website. This is Teacher Talk. There are three main components, a blog, a forum, resources. It's designed so that people can interact with the site in multiple different ways. You could read a blog, you could message on a discussion board, maybe find a new podcast under the recommendations. And I had 6 different guest authors on the blog over the summer. They wrote on a variety of topics, as you can see. And I was really purposeful with choosing different types of teachers. So they came from different school contexts. They had different roles within their school community. And they all also came from different states, which was really great. So I had this big, wide focus. And summertime meant that they were like naturally more reflective, thinking about the past year. But if I'm being frank, my website was the least successful part of my summer. It's really hard to build something that people want to go to and see repeatedly and return to. I do plan to keep the website up through the summer, but I'm not really sure what's next there. However, I knew that my website wasn't going to grow on its own, so I started using social media to help get people to come to my site. And I found this really great way that everyone can help teachers. So have you ever heard of like a clear the list campaign? You know? Yeah, I'm getting some head nods. Well, what I started doing was any teacher who posted their wish list to my forum, I bought something off their list. And it was great. Personally, those last few weeks of the summer where I was buying gifts for teachers were the most enriching part for me. I was able to see in real time the joy that it brought, and it was a great last-minute addition to my summer, and I am so thankful to be in the right place at the right time with this funding to be able to contribute to this. Arguably, this fundraising push was the least and most impactful part of my summer. I was able to make a real difference in the lives of the 14 teachers who I bought gifts for. But it's not like I did anything to change our broken education system. But I did help lower the stress on some teachers and buy some really fun books for kids. But what this summer really taught me is that there are a million ways to support teachers. You can work with advocacy groups to lobby the government. You can amplify the voices of the teachers in your own life. But really, whenever possible, I encourage you to support teachers directly. This summer really helped me appreciate the work that goes into running a school, running a classroom, and I'm excited to keep working in the field of education to build better support systems for students and teachers.
Okay, I know like I've literally read the 18-page reports and whatever, and I still just grin ear to ear hearing everyone talk about their impact and work this summer because it's truly incredible. So I'm gonna invite you all back up. If you can bring those lab mics with you and then pass them around there. Yeah, perfect, so handheld. And then we have about 5 or so minutes from any questions from audience members, and it could be for a specific civic scholar or for the collective 4. Whatever is on your mind. And then we have Danielle and myself who will walk around with a microphone so those in the room and those on YouTube can hear. So, yeah.
Yeah, so this is specifically for Lexie. By the way, amazing project. I loved hearing every second of it. But so since you plan to go into education, and I guess this is somewhat generalizable to all of you guys, like how does your project sort of inform like the next steps that you'll take in that sort of journey?
Yeah, so on a personal note, so I am a double major in education and American culture studies, and I'm kind of playing around with what I want to do next. And part of the summer was me figuring out if I'm ready to be a teacher yet. And this kind of taught me, maybe not right now, maybe not quite yet, because there is so much work and it is such a demanding job, and I have immense respect for anyone who is a classroom teacher. Maybe one day, but not quite yet for me.
My question is for Diamond. Happy birthday. I wanted to ask, is there any, you think, critical information for childbearing people to know that maybe hospitals don't tell them?
Possible to not tell them?
Yeah, that hospitals leave out. Or
Yeah, there's a lot. For instance, like C-sections, they're not really necessary. The thing about the United States maternal health care system is they treat pregnancy like it's an illness as opposed to it's a natural cause. In life and in the U.S. healthcare system, the most important thing is just getting the baby out as fast as possible. And these hospitals and health providers are oftentimes following the policies of their insurance and what's stated by the hospital due to liability and whatnot. So it's very rare that the patient is the main concern. It's really just getting the baby out, and oftentimes for Black and brown women, that just doesn't really translate that well either. For instance, there's been a lot of instances this year that I've seen, and even just that's always happened. A Black woman can go into her regular primary care doctor's office 7 months pregnant, need a doctor's note for a bed rest, and the nurse and the doctor will argue with her about it. She doesn't need the rest, she's absolutely fine, and things like that. Secondly, most of what we know about pregnancy and how our maternal health care system is created, it has been through the experimentation on Black and brown bodies, and there has never really been much care there in that aspect, and a lot of that has passed down intergenerationally, which is something that was very important part of Sarah's project, and also something a part of mine. Like she said, like this trauma does pass down through families, especially for Black people. So for instance, the trauma that my mother has experienced, for instance, okay, so my existence right now, the egg that my mom, that was in my mom's womb that made me, was also in my grandmother's womb. And so whatever trauma that my grandmother experienced and whatever fears and beliefs she had, that genetically passed down to my mother, which then when my mother had me, it passed down to me, and so things like that. And so it's really important to decolonize, really important to understand where these beliefs are coming from, and just to break the system down, because there's no fixing it. It just needs to be destroyed.
Hello. I feel like there is room for undergraduate students to support in all of y'all's projects, and so I was just wondering if y'all can give a one or two type of things as far as how can undergraduate students support your projects, or just support your cause and your passions going forward, especially as you all are going to be leaving campus soon.
Okay, so in terms of the project of the Office of International Students and Scholars, since we want undergraduate students to be able to talk about their experiences. Potentially undergraduate students who have had research positions or internships can speak with our international community about what it's like to work in these roles in the United States, and also something just a more future vision, having future civic scholars also take on this project as well, and having summer interns and orientation leaders work on this project. The Office of International Student Scholars hires orientation leaders for the summer, so that's also one way to engage with the office and this project, as orientation leaders are expected to attend at least one event per semester.
I guess for my project, I think it depends. In some way, many people can go into communities, but I think that you have to go into them with training, with thought about who you are interacting with. So I guess my advice is not necessarily to go into Black communities and try to do this work, but really to make sure to hold the ideas of intergenerational trauma and all of that in your experiences, in how you go into your whatever you are interested in, and make sure that you are preventing these biases and really trying to stop intergenerational trauma or stop the effects of it continuing, and racism and all of that.
I think the best way for students to get involved is probably really similarly to how I got involved. So I volunteered at a charter school once a week last semester, and it was really, really great. You get to meet really great kids, great teachers, and like being that extra person in a kid's life can really help, helping them with tutoring skills, helping them build back. We're still dealing with backslides from the COVID-19 pandemic, and that one-on-one tutoring connection is a really important thing for students. And I think that that's probably your best and easiest route into helping the local St. Louis community.
Yeah, as far as how undergraduate students can get in, a lot of WashU students pre-med, a lot of y'all chemistry, biochemistry, all of that. A lot of y'all are in global med, things of that nature. And I think it's really important, before we talk about getting involved, it would be important for the vast majority of the WashU population to understand why they are doing the things. Because at least in my experience in the past 2 years that I've been here, WashU, the only thing that WashU's done is take away from St. Louis. And the goal of my project was to give whatever I could that I took in the process of being a student here, and as well as supporting that. And the way to support that is be knowledgeable. Y'all need to know what the hell is going on in St. Louis. It's about the community. You can't go to WashU and you say you're in St. Louis and you know what's going on. You're only on campus. You don't get off that. You need to know what the community meetings are happening. Like what's the policies in North City, St. Louis? What's the policies in South City, St. Louis? You know, are there any community board meetings that you can join? When you're thinking about volunteering, don't just think about volunteering at those hospitals, but what are the policies of those hospitals? What kind of medical providers do they have? What are their rates for maternal mortality rate, and how can you advocate given what your position is in the work that you do? So I think the first thing starts with knowledge and understanding the role that you play as someone that's, you know, contributing to this harm, and then just once you equip yourself with that knowledge, advocate, and be a part of the community. Like, that's really all I can say.
Well, I hear a challenge in that last comment, so thanks, Timon. So we are going to do a little interruption in the middle, so thank you for being our first panelist. In the back of the room, we have birthday cake for Diamond and Ruchika, and everyone who's here. So if you all want to get some sweet treats, find your seat again, and then we will get started with our final 3 at 6 o'clock on the dot. Awesome.
All right, as we're getting mic'd up and getting ready, my name is Dwayne T. James. I am one of the co-facilitators, and I will be your MC for the second part. I'll try to do as good as Stephanie did. I'll try. All right, so with that, first up is Ruchika. She is did I get that right? Okay, kinda. Ruchika? I'm trying. That's why I asked. All right. And the parents are here too. Oh, wow, they're taking pictures and everything. Oh, good. All right. Kleinhandler, Civic Scholar from Plymouth, Minnesota. Her project focused on increasing mental health access for unhoused populations in St. Louis, working with volunteers of Unhoused St. Louis, a local grassroots organization. She developed and conducted a training program centered around empathy-based interaction. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
How did the system fail you?
Well, at the time that I first became homeless, I was living in a small town, and I was told it would take more than 2 years to be able to see a specialist, like a psychiatrist.
Unfortunately, there are many other people out there like Jennifer who are unhoused and struggling. You know, we think about how do we fix this? The first thought is maybe we put in more mental health practitioners, more psychiatrists, more psychologists. But how do we know when is enough, and where do we even start with that? So my first thought was, what if we start from within? Here at WashU, we have a peer counseling organization known as Uncle Joe's. Don't ask me who Uncle Joe is, we have no idea. But I've been grateful to be a part of this organization since my freshman year. So I've had the opportunities to see mental health here on campus pre-COVID, during COVID, and now in this weird post-COVID era. Uncle Joe's operates as a 24/7 phone line as well as an in-person office every night from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Students utilize our service for kind of a whole range of things, so it can be difficulty adjusting to campus all the way up to sexual assault, and unfortunately at rising rates, suicidality. Now to clarify, Uncle Joe's is a completely peer-run and organized organization. So we are really just peers supporting peers. And in my opinion, I think that's what makes us really unique, and that's why we're so heavily utilized here on campus. If I've learned anything from my time with this organization, it's that taking the time to listen to people and make them feel heard can be really incredibly meaningful. I also want to emphasize that we are not a replacement for professionals in any way. There are plenty of other resources here on campus that do that job, but we are really just here to kind of close that gap. As I started thinking about some of the most marginalized people in our society, people like Jennifer, I thought about what it would look like to take kind of the main principles of Uncle Joe's and translate them outside of WashU. As I was brainstorming what this would look like, I came across an organization here in St. Louis called Unhoused STL. Unhoused STL is a grassroots organization founded on the belief of until. So though they recognize that what unhoused people really need is housing, until they're able to do so, they'll help them with their basic needs, whatever those might be. Now the beauty of Unhoused is really in its grassroots nature. Many of their volunteers and members have really intimate relationships with being unhoused, whether that's because they've experienced it themselves or because of a family member. These photos here just show some of the many amazing people that make up this community. Now, speaking of their volunteers, this is where I started when I started thinking about my project. Working with their pre-existing volunteer base, I recruited trainees for my program. The hope was to conduct a training for volunteers in kind of basic empathy skills so that they could go on and provide a very basic form of mental health care to our unhoused neighbors. This was really meant to mirror a lot of the work that's done here at WashU with Uncle Joe's. When I first put out kind of the feelers for this program, I was absolutely terrified that no one would sign up, but I was pleasantly surprised. Overnight, I had over 30 people reach out with interest in the program. Now, the real number of trainees was much lower than that, but it was still incredibly validating to see so many people excited about the program. However, along with this excitement also came some pushback. Some members of the community were worried that me as an individual and me as a WashU student didn't have the adequate kind of credentials to take on this role. And I really took that feedback to heart. So over a good portion of my summer, I worked with physicians, counselors, other people here in the community who reached out to make sure that I could really come at this program in an ethical way. So I ended up having 15 volunteers who started and completed my program. And I had a wide range of people. I had a 30-year-old mom who was just doing this out of interest, and I had a 70-year-old individual who was a retired lawyer and actually a recovered alcoholic who spent a lot of his time mentoring people in AA. I'm really grateful for this variety because it added so much dimension to the space and taught me so much.
Each week we engaged in conversation. We learned about all sorts of things. We put a big emphasis on mental health and substance use, since those are really big things that affect the unhoused community. And it was really amazing to see the way the trainees were able to absorb and internalize the material. As for what comes next, these trainees are now going to be placed in winter warming shelters and other community centers where unhoused people frequent, and they'll kind of provide this basic form of mental health care / counseling. And I'm working with Unhoused to create a series of workshops so that people can continue getting this training, and the hope is that the trainees who just trained will become trainers so that this work can continue once I graduate and leave WashU. There's a lot to be done still, but I want to end on the message of hope. There are so many incredible people here in St. Louis who are doing work for the unhoused community and doing really meaningful work. So I think if I've learned anything, I just encourage everyone to take the time to listen to the people around you, people that maybe you don't normally engage with or have conversations with, because there is so much to learn. So, thank you.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday. See, y'all knew I was going to sing. Y'all knew that when y'all gave me the mic. All right. As Stephanie mentioned, Maurice was not able to make it tonight. He is a Margaret Olsen and Dr. Joseph Marcus, a civic scholar from Palo Alto, California. Maurice explored questions of network and community by creating an online platform for student activists to transfer knowledge, working with community organizations focused on building economic power outside the traditional nonprofit grant model, and by running an educational program with members of several identity-based student activist organizations to foster and inform solidarity by developing strong theoretical foundations. If you want to hear more or see more about Maurice's work, you can go to this site and find out more, and we will be videoing Maurice at a different time to make sure that his information gets shared out there as well. He is not off the hook. I am sorry. All right, so with that, we'll move on. Christian is next. Christian is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Hawthorne, California. His project led to the creation of a guide for faculty and staff within WashU to better support their disabled students, both in and out of the classroom. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christian.
Thank you, Dwayne.
No problem.
Hey, everyone. Before I get started, I want to lead with a couple of questions for you all to think over. When it comes to disability, what can it look like? How does it feel to have one? Who do you know in your life who identifies as disabled? Taking it on back to me, as a reminder, I'm Christian Alexander, a Stern Family Civic Scholar who, after working on and off with students with disabilities since my freshman year, decided to spend my civic summer making a guide to better support disabled students academically. So, doubling back to whatever you all thought of, disability is that plus so much more. There's incredible diversity of experiences while living in this able-bodied world. For instance, someone who struggles with sight will have completely different experiences than someone who's totally sightless. Similarly, someone who can't hear versus someone whose brain isn't typical will also have different experiences navigating this world as well. So this complexity in understanding disability and supporting it doesn't necessarily translate well into higher education. So in considering how to best support students with disabilities, I decided to start relatively near the top, providing support for faculty and staff and learning more inclusive ways of teaching. So that tends to raise a question. How do I actually reach professors and staff members about this? Well, why reinvent the wheel when it's already out there? As you can see, a guide was created previously by the Educational Development Division, EdDev, a part of the Center of Teaching and Learning, and they, in conjunction with the Hub of Health and Wellness Center, made a guide to support student mental health early this year. Icing on the cake, EdDev works directly with teachers to begin with. So, making use of a similar framework, I decided to make a guide for WashU professors and staff members, showing more inclusive ways of supporting their students with disabilities. This meant pitching my idea to EdDev and partnering with them, but also partnering with disability resources, the disability experts, in ensuring that the ADA is followed and that students are given their accommodations. In addition to these community partnerships, I also wanted to make something that balanced student perspective with what's already proven and supported by the literature in accessible classrooms. So to do that, I partnered with a student group, Ability WashU, so I could distribute some of the work among other passionate students who care for students with disabilities. So, in researching and compiling inclusive teaching practices, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone provided the backbone of easy, achievable practices for professors. From thought exercises to checklists and diagrams to outlining the role of technology in classes, this book really breaks down how to make a class accessible and why it should be built that way instead of made that way later. But in making something that fits within WashU, it's just as important to hear from students who have lived through navigating the school with a disability. So to that end, I made a Google form asking students for what they want professors to know and offering those interested a chance to provide feedback on the guide as it's being made. Financial compensation, to make sure that we cater to disabled voices. So a lot of this work between partners relies heavily on communication and collaboration. I'd say the biggest lesson I learned was how to communicate effectively to multiple groups. It's necessary to stay humble and be mindful of others' perspectives and point of view, and whether or not that's something worth communicating to Group A or Group B in the first place. So, a lot of the summer was spent getting a large first draft of sorts finished, like that library on the left, and this semester has been spent condensing that work to make it easier and more approachable for professors, similar to the CTL Habif guide shown on the right, published last year. As of right now, I am hoping to email a finished guide to professors and staff before the beginning of the spring 2023 semester. That way, as professors are organizing their syllabi, planning their semesters, getting office hours in order, they can spend roughly an hour or more reading how to make a more inclusive class. That can, in turn, save them dozens of hours throughout the semester. And one of the best parts of making these changes for accessibility and inclusivity, like a dropped exam or having automatic captions over Zoom, is that it gives everyone more options and supports in demonstrating their knowledge, not just students with disabilities who need the support more than others. And in closing, I'd really like to say that this was far from an individual effort. I'm incredibly grateful to be in partnership with Disability Resources and the Center for Teaching and Learning, to work with Ability WashU, to receive some support from the Office of the Provost, from dozens of students with disability who filled out the Google form as mentioned previously, to the Gephardt Institute and the Stern family for funding this project in the first place, to the many people and friends of mine here at WashU who have offered some support, help, feedback in one way or another. In other words, accessible practices truly do mean that you can reach and teach everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Great job, Christian. Great job. Wonderful. All right. Next up, Kayla. Kayla is a Sidon Family Civic Scholar from Cleveland, Ohio. For her project, Kayla conducted archival research for the Missouri History Museum's Gateway to Pride initiative aimed at preserving and showcasing the rich, complex, and diverse history of St. Louis's LGBTQ+ community. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so my name is Kayla, and this is a photo of my mom and I on Halloween of 2010. And now that you've seen this photo, you probably won't be even a little bit surprised to hear that I was dressed as an Ohio State football player, and then 4 years later I came out as gay. Shocker. So I grew up in Solon, Ohio, which is a suburb about 15 miles southeast of Cleveland. And it was a really great place to grow up. We had really well-funded public schools that I attended, and one of my favorite things about Solon was it was really ethnically diverse. About 30% of Solon's population consists of immigrants or first-generation Americans. But for all of its racial and ethnic and religious diversity, Solon was not very diverse in gender identity or sexual orientation, which is in line with findings across the rest of the Midwest. Growing up queer in the Midwest, you really don't have a lot of representation, and I was really looking for that when I came to college. I was looking to see if that existed outside of the New Yorks and the San Franciscos of the world. Before I got here, really all I knew about queer experience or queer history was limited to Stonewall. This is the only known photo taken from night one of the Stonewall riots. But Greenwich Village in New York City seemed really, really far away from Ohio and really, really far away from Missouri, and 1969 felt like a really long time ago. So I partnered for my civic summer with the Missouri History Museum, the Missouri Historical Society, and worked on their Gateway to Pride initiative. For the Gateway to Pride initiative, I sort of acted like a mini curator of sorts. I would go into libraries at the State Historical Society of Missouri, at the University of Missouri St. Louis, or at WashU's libraries in the Olsen Special Collections, and I would make appointments, call them, tell them which boxes I was interested in looking through, and then once I would look through those boxes every day, I would read for hours. I would record notes on my laptop in my physical notebook. I would take scans of anything that I thought might be a useful artifact or piece of contextual information for the museum. And then I would send that along. So while I was in WashU Special Collections on the left, I spent most of my time working with the Laura Ann Moore papers. Laura Ann Moore was a really prominent lesbian, feminist activist in St. Louis. Her collection spanned roughly the 1960s to the 1990s. And while she did a lot of really interesting queer activism, I was personally really interested in the fact that she also did a lot of racial activism, housing activism, AIDS-related activism. And the emphasis that she placed on intersectionality I found really interesting. Specifically, she worked with this women's car repair collective, which operated on a sliding scale and sought to provide honest and affordable auto repair services to and for women. This really struck me as an early form of radical mutual aid, and I was super hooked. And then when I got to the State Historical Society of Missouri, I read through the Barbara McGough papers. You don't need to read this. This is a letter she wrote her senator, and you probably can't read it anyways. But your takeaway about Barbara should be that she did everything. She was involved in everything, just like Laura, and she saved everything, which was super useful for me, obviously. And I was just really interested in the work that she did. I saw the same commitment to honesty, transparency, and intersectionality in her work that I saw in Laura's. This is a holiday flyer that I found in Barbara's papers from St. Louis Acts Out, which was a prominent activist organization at the time. And this struck me as a form of care and love expressed by queer St. Louisans to queer St. Louisans at a time when I didn't realize that those connections even existed in the first place. This is from Laura's papers. This is a collection or a list of different lesbian-focused gatherings and groups. And I wouldn't know where to find something like this in 2022. So I was shocked to see that this existed in 1978. And not only did it exist, but it existed right here in St. Louis in the Midwest. It was the kind of representation that I had never seen before. These are some of the artifacts, just some, of the memorabilia that I found in Barbara's papers. Like I said, she kept everything. And this was the most exposure I had ever had to the queer experience and queer history, and it came from St. Louis. I realized that this network that I had uncovered of queer activism has existed for a really long time, even when I didn't realize it. And I don't think that the importance of these community networks can really be understated. I think that the work that Laura was doing, the work that Barbara was doing, and the work that all of these other activists were doing showcases that this really rich and complex and diverse history of queer experience in St. Louis has always existed, and it still exists now, and you just have to know where to find it. So when you think of queer St. Louis, you might be like me, you might see the right, you may think of Rehab, and you might think of Pride Fest, but I also want you to think of Dante's Inferno, which was Rehab before Rehab, and a real Pride Parade, because we don't really have those anymore. This one's from 1981. This experience has always existed, and learning about it can really clarify so much about your own identity, I promise. So, little call to action. The in-person component of the exhibit is opening in the first quarter of 2024 to celebrate 10 years of marriage equality, and I highly urge you, if you're in St. Louis, to check it out. I think that you'll find there's something for everyone, whether you're queer or not, and I hope that you keep in mind that queer history has existed everywhere, and St. Louis history and Missouri history are maybe a little bit more queer than you would expect.
Wonderful job. Great job. All right, I invite our last three up. Get your questions ready. Get your questions ready.
So once again, super amazing job, all of you guys. So I guess for Kayla, I was wondering, so you said that like you would have trouble finding a sort of similar network. For those in the community who like aren't perhaps looking, how would they be like informed about like the community in St. Louis? And I guess like, do you think there's any reason why it seemed more connected back then than it is now?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that it was more connected back then than it is now. I mean, I think that if I probably put more effort into seeking out a community like this right now, I would probably find it just as easily as I found the one that I uncovered over the summer. I think that if you're really seeking out the sort of community like that, I think that, well, one, I think it's easier now than it was then. I think that more people like myself are out and just talk to people, I think, number one. Ask people where they're going and who they're talking to and meeting people that way. But I mean, go to the museum, like go to the exhibit when it opens. There's an online component open right now. And I think that, you know, I think that it's easy to find if you're willing to put in the effort. And I think that if you're not really interested to put in the effort, I would urge, you know, young queer people to do the sort of research that I did on a much smaller scale. Don't go into the archives, but go to the museum website and see what they have to say. And I think it might spark interest enough to sort of seek out those connections further.
More questions? Don't be shy, it's okay. More? Any? Oh, we got one in the bed. I knew you had a question. I knew you did.
Hey, y'all. I was just wondering if y'all could explain y'all whys. I feel like we've seen a lot of presentations today that are linked to a lot of different like passions and things like that, and I feel like that passion and that thought is very important, especially in projects like this. And so if you can just explain like your why. Some of you did that already in your presentations, but just giving like a brief synopsis of like that why, especially as it relates to your experience of being here at WashU.
I can go first. I think I touched on this a little bit. Sorry, not to make you listen to me talk back to back to back. I think I talked about this a little bit, but I think right now in the current political climate, it can be really easy for young queer people in the Midwest or in red states like Ohio or like Missouri to flee to areas that are, you know, liberal and more on paper welcoming. But I love where I'm from and I love where I am now, and I wanted a reason to stay, and I found it.
Yeah, so little background about my experiences. I've been working on and off with a student who is visually impaired for roughly 2 or so years now, and I never seen personally, but as a secondhand witness, you know, transcribing emails or helping to plan this or that, like I've witnessed the sheer amount of like barriers that they've had to go through within WashU, whether it be with professors or with disability resources or just in trying to find what, if any, other visually impaired students there are. And so after seeing just like all of that, you know, like work that they have to do that I cannot relate to at all whatsoever, I wanted to make something that, like, you know, could at least start to make a process easier for like future students, whether they're visually impaired or anything else, really.
Yeah, I think I have a two-part answer. The first part in terms of why mental health and where that interest kind of came from and sparked. When I was entering high school, I had a close friend of mine tell me that they were kind of experiencing suicidality, and that was my first real experience with mental health, and I had no idea how to react. And they're fine and they've gotten the help that they needed, but I think that was a friendship that I lost because I reacted really poorly because I didn't know what to do. And so I dedicated the next how many ever years to making sure that that would never happen again. And I just got interested on the advocacy side, and then now since coming to WashU, being on that like counseling side of things has been really meaningful. And then in terms of like why working with the unhoused, I feel like a lot of times when it comes to big societal level issues, you kind of get overwhelmed with where to start, and a lot of people might check out before they even try, or feel like the work that they're going to do is not going to be impactful because there's so many other issues at play. And I think for me, seeing that like starting small, having a conversation with someone, adding meaning to their day-to-day, that can go a really long way, and I wanted a way to translate that into this work, and it just felt right. So, yeah.
All right, any questions? More? All right, let's give them. Oh, we have one.
Oh. I love Barry. Honestly. Barry's the glue that holds the Civic Scholars Program together, just so everybody knows.
Quite frankly.
No, I was really shocked. Well, I wasn't really surprised, but especially for Ruchika, like the emails about pushback that you got from entering the community. So I was wondering, like, how did you sort of like, what was the process like, sort of dealing with that pushback? And did any of you guys also feel pushback from yourselves or from external community members about entering this? Because I feel like all of you guys covered relatively delicate like fields and interests. So what was that process like entering that community, and I guess for you facing that pushback, and how did you feel?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. But I'll say one thing during training for Uncle Joe's is you get a lot of criticism and a lot of feedback. And so you learn pretty early, you know, the stakes are high, so you learn pretty early like how to take that feedback in, which is really good. But I think in this context, it was really scary because I know in Civic we've talked a lot about like making sure you enter communities ethically and that the communities you're entering need you there and want you there. And I at first saw this and was like, oh, I can't swear on here. I was like, oh no, like I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And so had to take a moment, had to take a pause, but then when I really got the chance to speak to the community members who were worried, it was just really a great way to like start a relationship and form a connection, and their concerns were very valid, and we just found a way to kind of help each other, and now hopefully this will be something that's more consistent, which I think is really cool. But I think that helps like build trust from the beginning that we were both wanting to work together. Yeah.
I think the biggest like indirect pushback you could argue, I guess, is like sometimes you write something that like you think is like hidden on something, like you think you digging into something good, like your point of view perspective like wrote that, but it did not resonate the same way it did with you with group A or group B or group C. And it really, I mean, in worst case scenario, it's about taking accountability for that and being like, oh, I am so sorry for this. Ooh, like I thought I was getting here, but it went all the way over there. And I had to like come correct and, you know, take accountability, understand what led to that, and prioritize what's important. You know, what's more important, staying on this hill and dying on it, or trying to get a guide out that will actually support students, support faculty? Just weighing a balancing act of things out.
I don't think I Okay, I don't feel like I feel like I was lucky. I don't think I experienced a ton of pushback in entering the community. I think just by virtue of being a member of the queer community, I think I was welcomed in for the most part with open arms. I mean, I had a little bit of time solidifying my specific partnership. If anything, it's wrong in a number of ways and maybe a little bit funny to call like the queer St. Louis scene like a boys club, but it did feel like that for a little bit. I think just in the sense that like it was a little bit, the people who were doing this work had been doing it for a long time, and there were only a few of them and they knew each other really well. So sort of being able to jump in and prove that I deserved to be there was a little bit difficult at first, but I mean overall, yeah, I don't have much to complain about.
All right, let's give them and everyone a round of applause. No problem, it's all good, got it. All right, I won't keep you too much longer, but as you heard tonight, and if you were able to join us yesterday, you heard about our Civic Scholars focusing on heavy, deep, major issues. I mean, major, deep, tough issues that can be scary, that can be intimidating, but they did it. And they did it by going in and looking at small bits of how do you basically start moving forward? How do you go in and start increasing access, collaborating, unpacking, supporting, working with, exploring, doing some creation, and conducting the research. It's all those actionable steps. So we heard great presentations yesterday, we heard great presentations tonight, but we need to do the work to continue the movement, continue the momentum, and ensure that all of this greatness and all of this excellence does not stop right now, but we continue to face these civic issues, these community issues that continue to affect all of St. Louis, the entire nation as well. So Great evening. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting these amazing individuals. And let's do credit to them by continuing to go out and do the work after today. All right, so with that, thank you very much.